from St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
And then we saw a lot of people decide not to have children. Oregon entered a demographic winter, Alabama, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Missouri. I mean, there's about 24 states now.
24 states? Yeah. Okay, this is sounding very bad for the U.S.
Yeah, it used to be about 4 or 5, and now we have 24. It's not all bad, but population's power. Think about possibly losing a congressional seat. It's not simply going to grow by the white population. It's going to grow by the population in which there's natural growth. Latinos, African Americans, and Asian Americans.
I'm Sarah Fensky. Last year, for the first time, Missouri entered into a state that experts call demographic winter. That means more people died than were born across the Show Me state. And that trend has persisted this year, even as COVID-19 deaths aren't quite so high. And joining us today to explain what it means and what it will take to get to demographic spring, hey, we can dream, right? Yes. Is Ness Sandoval. He's a professor of sociology at St. Louis University. He's also director of the master's program in sociology. He's one of the directors of the Geospatial Institute, and he currently runs the Computational Spatial Demography Lab. That's a lot going on there. We're glad you've made time. Ness, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me back to talk about this important topic.
Yeah, so break this down for us. Is demographic winter really as simple as deaths succeed births?
That's essentially what we're talking about. It's a demographic transition. And we use these terminologies to talk about something that's changing from the norm. And the norm, when we think about demographic models, is we just assume that there will always be more babies born than people dying. That's the part of human history. But we now know from looking at Japan, Russia, that this is not the case, that you enter into what's called the fifth stage of the demographic transition model, where more people are dying than are being born, and it's come here to the United States.
Is it unusual to see an individual state like Missouri hit this point?
It's been happening. It's happening on the Northeast, Maine, West Virginia, New Hampshire. So these are states, we can talk about the reasons why. They appeared on our map a decade ago. I think what happened because of COVID, we call this a demographic shock. When you have demographic shocks, there are three demographic transitions that we're concerned about: birth, death, and migration. And demographic shocks can impact all three of those transitions. But when you have a pandemic, we're interested in, are more people dying, but then are more people postponing births because of the uncertainty of what's happening. So we know, for example, in 2008, when the Great Recession happened, that was a demographic shock. People didn't die, but people stopped having children because there was a sense of fear the economy is not going to be here. And so when we see these demographic shocks, we want to understand what's happening to these three core demographic transitions. And so what happened with COVID is we saw a lot of people die, and then we saw a lot of people decide not to have children. And this is state by state. And so Oregon entered a demographic winter, Alabama, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Missouri. I mean, there's about 24 states now.
24 states? Yeah. Okay, this is sounding very bad for the U.S.
Yeah, it used to be about 4 or 5, and now we have 24 states.
Well, so look, I'm an optimist about COVID. Despite all evidence in front of me, I want to believe that at some point this pandemic is going to end. Is it possible that when we don't have so many people dying from COVID, that Missouri can pull out of this thing?
So it's possible. So there's another concept we call demographic hurdles. And so Missouri has a demographic hurdle. And so it is, we've seen deaths come down, but we've also seen birth rates come down. And so the lowest level of birth was in February of 2021, under 5,000. Never happened in modern time in Missouri. And so this is about 9 to 10 months after the state lockdown and said, what's going on? And so we're missing about 600 children in February that we typically would have had in the past.
Wow.
And we know that fertility rates are coming down because of the Great Recession of 2008. It never came back up. Plus, we have our baby boomers. That was a great demographic shock. they're starting to die. And so we're going to see even more people dying from other causes of death. And so we have to figure out, are there going to be enough babies born to offset the death of the baby boomers?
So you say we're in this hurdle. So this is something that we can overcome, but you're saying we can't just write this off as this is a blip, this is COVID, everything's going to be good in a couple years. It sounds like some things are going to have to change beyond just deaths from COVID for Missouri to get over this hurdle.
Absolutely. And so we run different types of scenarios. And so one scenario could be, for example, if you take Tennessee, and you take the Latino population in Tennessee and switched it out with Missouri would not be in a demographic winter.
So if we just had more immigrants
Latinos
coming here.
Well, not just immigrants.
Not just immigrants.
You need the
Latinos being willing to move to this area.
Yeah, exactly. If you took Nashville's Latino population and replaced it here in St. Louis, we would be a top 20 metropolitan region.
Wow. And yet that's not happening.
It's not happening.
I mean, St. Louis has historically had such a small number of Latino residents. So you look at that, is there something like we need to become a more welcoming place?
I think we need to be more intentional at the state level of a message that all Americans are welcome to move to Missouri.
Not just white Americans.
We need to be welcoming. We need to send this message out to states that have a demographic spring, such as Texas, Phoenix, Arizona. You're going to grow your population by Latinos, by Asian, and by Americans that identify as mixed race. That's where the growth is coming from over the next couple decades.
So these are the populations that are still ascending in this country.
That are having more births than deaths.
Yeah.
And so if you just look at Missouri in 2019, 100% of the natural growth from births minus deaths came from minorities.
So were white Missourians in demographic winter even before the
Absolutely.
pandemic?
They were in the demographic before the pandemic happened. And when you look at the numbers, the white population in Missouri is where the white population was in West Virginia a decade ago. And it's not, so the question would be, it's very difficult to see the white population getting out of the demographic winter because you have young whites who are leaving the state who tend to have the children, but you have a baby booming population that tends to be white that will be dying soon. And so if you look at what happened, and it's happening in West Virginia, on average, between 7,000 and 8,000 net loss of white residents, and it's getting larger each year in West Virginia. And that pattern is definitely possible in the state of Missouri, where right now it's just about 2,000 net loss of white residents in the state, but you could easily see this being 4,000 to 5,000 per year.
So let's talk about the St. Louis metro area as opposed to Missouri as a whole. Here in St. Louis, we pride ourselves on we're not all white. We're open to immigrants. You know, we want to welcome new people here. Do we know if the St. Louis metro area is in a state of demographic winter?
So we're doing good. For the area itself, we're okay. But we have some outlying counties that are already in a demographic winter. So the city is fine, the county, St. Louis County, St. Charles, fine. We have enough more babies being born than people dying. But it's in the outer counties.
Outer counties,
like Lincoln and in those areas where it's
both sides of the river.
Yeah, on both sides.
We're seeing that in Illinois and in Missouri.
Absolutely.
Demographic winter.
More on the Illinois side than on the Missouri side.
Okay. So that's a real problem. I mean, that can kind of drag down the metro area.
It's a demographic hurdle.
Okay.
That and part of it is you have people who want to live in the bigger counties. They want that urban life. And so there's the migration element here that is part of this story.
Ness, I got to say, I like your optimism in approaching this stuff here. What I say is a big problem. You say it's a hurdle. And that's, I think, how maybe we need to think about this here. But I want to look a little bit back in the history. There's a statistic that actually came from you that I think is really interesting here. You say going back to the 1850s that St. Louis just had sort of a remarkable achievement here when we're looking at the population of St. Louis.
Yeah. So when part of it is it's about our debates today and conversations of how do we get more diverse. And we're seeing it today in 2020. But if we go back to 1850 and we look at the immigrant population across the United States and we look at large counties, St. Louis was number one, coming in at right about 53% of the population was foreign born. And we see that pattern in St. Clare County at that time, St. Charles, although they were very small, they had significant foreign-born populations. And we always like to compare ourselves to Cook County in Chicago. We were head of Chicago, Cook County in 1850. Yeah,
more immigrants in St. Louis than in Chicago.
Absolutely. We were a bigger county. And so in 1850, so when people think about immigrant gateway cities, San Francisco comes to mind, New York comes to mind. But it was really, the story that needs to be told is St. Louis was one of the most important immigrant cities in 1850. And that story needs to be told because as St. Louis tries to diversify, it is part of our history. And so when we see these immigrant destinations emerge, Chesterfield, Maryland Heights, it's part of our history. It's not new. It's part of our history that's there.
And what would you like to see happen to encourage more of that?
I think we need to be intentional. I think we need to talk about what the demographic hurdles that exist. And there is a perception out there that Missouri and St. Louis may not be the most welcoming cities. And so when you talk to young people and they talk about cities that they would like to go to, Atlanta, Houston, Phoenix, very seldom you don't hear St. Louis come up in that. I even hear young people talking about moving to Minneapolis.
I hear a lot of that too.
And so my goal is there are a lot of things that we can do to reimagine how we tell this story of St. Louis, the history of St. Louis, and the opportunities to live here.
And you've mentioned Nashville as a city that we can learn from. I understand Pittsburgh. You had mentioned that Pennsylvania is also in this demographic winter that we're in. But Pittsburgh, you're not so worried about.
Well, Pittsburgh's the largest metropolitan region in a demographic winter. So it's got more people are dying than being born, and it's got more people leaving than coming in. And so it's got these hurdles. But it's also found a way to reimagine itself as a city and as a region. And
like, what are they doing, for example?
So their economies, the university, I think, so they've recognized that they're not going to be Phoenix. They're not going to be Atlanta. But they want to focus on what they can rebuild in the city and reimagine the opportunities that are there. And so it's not all bad, but population's power. And if these numbers continue, it is very possible for a state in 2040 to think about possibly losing a state representative in Congress, congressional seat. If you run the numbers and nothing changes, we will be up again.
This could strike a blow to our political power.
Absolutely, population's power. And so if your state's not growing, and we see it's a natural decline. From births and deaths, it's got challenges. And I'll just add one final point. It's a state that saw a very small increase in the African-American population, about 6,000 residents. And that should be concerning.
Why so? Because at least that's an increase, right? They're not in demographic winter.
Yeah. It should have grown by 50,000 people. And so we have an out-migration of African-American residents. But you have other states like North Dakota, South Dakota, that actually grew in absolute numbers larger than Missouri. And so this becomes, I think, challenging for a state. And even St. Louis. St. Louis experienced a decline in the African-American population, the region. Mm-hmm. How can you say that you're a major metropolitan region if you have a declining African-American population for a region and a state? And so we want to look over the next 10 years because a lot of that increase in babies over deaths, African Americans are the largest increase is coming from the Latino population. Number two is the African American population. And so if we start to see African Americans leave, we're going to start to see babies leave the state.
So you're seeing some real warning signs here, even in some numbers that we might point to as, there's still growth here, or this is good happening here. The long-term view, if current trends continue, are we headed for West Virginia status?
It's possible. We have to be intentional. We're talking demographically.
Yes.
Right. Demographically, there's a possibility. We have 10 years. We have these 10 years where we need to be intentional and saying we need to refigure how to get younger minority populations to move to Missouri, to repopulate our big cities, and these are the populations that are having babies.
So this sounds like the exact opposite of what a lot of state lawmakers here are focused on, frankly.
Yeah, I do not hear them talking about this at all. But you do look at other states, and other states have recognized that we have, even this census was part of what the themes of the census is that the United States is slowing down in terms of population growth. And so every state now recognizes that you have to encourage people. You can only grow so much by babies being born over people dying. You need other people to move to your state. And you're seeing North Carolina is very aggressive in getting people to move from New York to North Carolina, getting people to move from Georgia to North Carolina. So you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional and go out and market your state and say, come and make Missouri your home. And I don't see that. If you take a point of view of that, it's laissez-faire and we're just going to let the markets take care of it, what we see is that the black population is going to leave at the state and it's going to impact the region. And you're going to have very slow-growing Latino population compared to its competing states like Tennessee, where it experienced one of the largest increases. When we look at the top 10 states of absolute Latino growth, Tennessee's there. I argue Missouri should have been in that list. It's not.
It sounds like other states have realized this is a competition in a way that Missouri in the last decade hasn't been fully aware of or hasn't acted on the knowledge of this. Is it too late for us to turn it around?
It's never too late.
Even with all these things underway, North Carolina trying to steal people left and right.
No, it's not too late because you have Texas and California. These are states in demographic springs, but these are states that if you can put your imagination on, imagine the St. Louis region with no people at all. Over the next 20 to 25 years, Texas will produce a region of about 2.8 to 3 million people of just 100% Latino.
Wow.
And the same will happen in California. Now, they're not all going to stay in Texas and California.
There's just not enough room in some parts of those states.
So they're going to be migrating out to try to find the American dream. The question is Missouri, and specifically St. Louis, going to be one of those cities where this young person grows up in Houston and says, I see my life in St. Louis? Or are they going to say, I see my life in Denver, Colorado, because I'm welcome there? Or even Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is growing tremendously by the Latino population. And there's a different sense, like we want you here in the state.
So we could change the road we're on. You're making a strong case we should change the road we're on. In our final minute here, just give us one cause for optimism here. Is there anything you can point to that suggests, there's immigrants that are here and that are happy, or there's people moving here, this is working?
So there's lots of good stories to be told at the micro level. I think what's happening in Chesterfield is a story that should be told. What's happening in Maryland Heights is a story that should gain recognition. When you look at the population that's in K through fourth grade and you go out to the schools, you're like, that's what America is going to look like in 30, 40 years. It's going to be that type of diversity. And so we need to embrace it. And as a state, we have to recognize that if we want our population to grow, it's not simply going to grow by the white population. It's going to grow by the population in which there's natural growth. And that's Latinos, African Americans, and Asian Americans.
Well, Ness Sandoval, thank you so much for joining us today with this dose of truth here.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Laura Hamden with audio engineering by Aaron Dorr and production assistance from Jane Matherglass. It was mixed and edited by Aaron. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.